So we're going to be taking a look at Reclamation, their instance of ProjectFirma today, and the way you would, this is the way you would turn on or off the evaluations. So one of us, like myself or another Sitka administrator, would come into the tenant configuration, and there's a little switch that we can turn on or off that is enable project evaluations. So Reclamations is turned on. And then if you go into manage, you'll see project evaluations right there. So let's take a look at that. Right now, there's only one evaluation that's been created. It's called Proposal Review 2020. And I'll just jump in there real quick. So each evaluation is going to have a basic section, an evaluation criteria section, and then an evaluation portfolio section. So what is this evaluation about? How are projects within this evaluation being evaluated in the evaluation criteria? And then in the evaluation portfolio, what projects are being evaluated? So let's go back out here. The evaluation can be given a definition. So what are we trying to accomplish with this evaluation? We're trying to review and rank proposals for approval in FY20. The evaluation has a kind of a current status. It's in progress, and we'll take a look at what that means more in a minute. You can give it a start and end date. Those don't really drive anything right now, but they're nice placeholders for potential down the road functionality, just to auto-populate proposals potentially. If you have a cyclical review process that you're involved in, that sort of stuff can be really helpful for just, it can maybe automatically insert projects that meet certain conditions, but we haven't implemented that yet. The evaluation criteria, so it will just list out the name of the each particular criterion that you have defined. And then the evaluation visibility, which is really who has access to this information. So we'll unpack all of that right now. You can create a new evaluation kind of with this button in the upper right here. Clicking on that, you'll see pretty much what you saw in the columns. So you give it a name, you give it a definition, you give it a status, etc. So we'll just create a simple one for now. And I think you're probably familiar, but these lightning bolts mean the field is required. So you have to provide information. Something interesting about the way we've built evaluations is if you choose the status of draft, so this is just, very early on, we've got a sketchy idea of what this evaluation may entail. You're not required to provide a start date or end date if you see how those disappeared there. So let's say they're required for some of the statuses. In draft, they're not required, so you don't need to provide that information. Additionally, the visibility, you can choose an evaluation that's visible only to you. So you can use this for your own day-to-day work if you're trying to prioritize projects in a way that's only relevant to you. Maybe particular folks, implementers you want to check in with, or projects that you want to prioritize according to some criteria. You can make it so that it's visible only to you. You can make it so that it's visible only to admins within your organization, or you can make it visible to all admins within your instance. So those are some of the high-level things. Now on this status, something else to mention. If you create a draft or a planned evaluation, because they're not in progress yet, they're kind of they're upcoming, or they're going to start at some point in the future, you can't actually conduct the evaluation. Now, if it's in progress or it's completed, you can modify the information about that evaluation. Completed is really meant to just kind of capture, for posterity's sake, the decisions and the rationales around ranking and funding that have been made. So the system will just persist the evaluations in case you want to revisit them in the future. Okay.
Jolly,
Uh-huh.
We have a question actually. Carrie wants to know, could we set up another user type called evaluators to grant broader access to a specific groups of people?
Yes, actually, we will take a look at, we have that story written up. That is one of the things that we're excited to potentially work on. So when we get a little bit later in the presentation, we can discuss that story more, but I think that's a great idea. And I'll actually show you specifically why that functionality might be good or might be necessary. There are a couple of workarounds that, for at least one piece of it, there are a couple of workarounds you can use right now. But as far as getting people who are not administrators permission to review, yes, that right now only administrators can be involved in the evaluation process. And so there's definitely a need for maybe we've talked about what's called an access control list. So an administrator could define particular users and roles in the system that would be able to evaluate a project. So that is on the horizon for us. Okay, so let's take a look in our evaluation here again. So we have our basic section, which describes just the purpose and general details of the evaluation itself. And then our evaluation criteria. This is what we're going to use to actually rank or assess, evaluate the projects that we fill into this portfolio down here. So right now I've got two kind of stubbed in, and there are a number of ways of defining or handling criteria. Some of the ways you could do it, you could have a ranking process where each criteria represents a different dimension. So for example, maybe biological would be one. What's the quality of this from a biological perspective? Number two could be logistical, right? So this one kind of hints at that, this site access criteria. How easy is it for us to actually get in there and do the work? It may be a slam dunk from a biological perspective and from a financial perspective. You know, it's really strong project, but maybe there's some issue with site access that makes it infeasible to potentially, or very difficult to do the work. You know, maybe there's not enough space to stage our equipment, or there's no real road access in, and so you'd have to kind of build a road, or you'd have to modify the landscape in order to actually get to the site. Maybe it's really far away from anywhere, and so there are other logistical concerns with staff travel all the way out there, et cetera. So that's one way. Each dimension represents sort of a particular facet of what you're considering, you know, financial, logistical, biological, even political or visual, right? Like, does it get a lot of face time with the public? Is it something that, you know, cars on the highway are driving by and they can see the good restoration work that we're implementing, something like that. Another way you can use this is each criteria could actually represent a person. So for example, we can create a new one here, and I'll show you. We'll say Jolly's opinion, right? And maybe there's a bunch of these for each voter, and you can start to do sort of a Delphi method approach where, you know, you can do rounds of opinions where Jolly gives his opinion, another stakeholder with maybe slightly different interests in the project and sort of what's important to them would give a different answer, and you can aggregate those in a way that can work. And you'll notice right now I'm adding numbers to the rating. And I think this is a pretty important point to make, because if you want to evaluate projects with more than one criteria, at some point, typically, it seems like you want to arrive at a final answer, one number, one ranking to rule them all, right? And if they're not numerical ratings, there's really not an easy, if they're just narrative descriptions, you know, I make this say very important or something instead of a 1. There's no easy way to then use like a sum or an average to really come up with a final number. Okay, so we've got Jolly's opinion here, and we could add more. You can see that there's a definition. There are a certain number of criteria. And now we can add projects. There are kind of two main ways to add projects. The first one is you can add projects according to the taxonomy. So each instance will have a different taxonomy. In this case, Reclamation's taxonomy would be, okay, we want to look at habitat projects, and maybe we want to look at them in a particular geography. We'll say the Grand Ronde. And we're really only interested in, say, screens. And I only want proposals, something like that. We add those, and then we'll see there are two that are proposals ready for review. You can also add projects individually if you want. So you just type in the name of the project and you can add it that way. So we'll add these two. And then the way you evaluate them, you'll see there are these three criteria we've established up here: basin ranking, site access, and then Jolly's opinion. They correspond to columns that get created in this grid. So basin ranking is the first one. It's the first column here. Site access is the second, and so forth. So you just come in and you would edit one of these projects, and you'll see there are the three criteria. And I'm going to say, you know, high, maybe it's a really good priority reach and it's important to the ESU. Medium site access, and then maybe I don't consider this project very important, or I consider it very important, whatever it might be. So you come through and you rank those. And we'll do maybe one more here. And then what you can do is, okay, you've got these different columns of numbers. If you download them, you can very quickly, in Excel, which I think most people are familiar with, come up with like overall score, right? And you can say, you know, equals the sum of those three potentially. And now what you're looking at is an aggregate or a composite of various dimensions. And you can see that, assuming they're equally weighted, right? There's no weighting applied to any of these dimensions. The Beeler Ranch, this Lemhi project, would be considered maybe superior. And so we should make sure that really this one gets funded first, and then, you know, we march on down the line. Yeah, so that's how that works. I think that about covers it. Let's see.
Jolly.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question here. Can
Sure.
multiple people be evaluating using the same evaluation at the same time?
If I understand correctly what is being asked here, yes. The one wrinkle is the criteria. You would have to recreate the criteria for each person. So let's say for person number 2, who's also going to be evaluating, we would have to, there's no way for us to copy across from Jolly's opinion, right? So that's another potential improvement for the future. But yes, once this is set up, each person can be in the app at the same time, and you can be evaluating, and it will really, it'll be your column. Now that said, someone else can modify your column. We have not restricted the columns, and so I could potentially come in here and say, well, even though I'm not person number 2, I'm going to say their opinion, you know, is it's a very important project. So like I said, it's pretty lightweight and flexible right now. We haven't done a lot of sort of locking down of functionality or anything like that so far. But I'll show you a few things that we've got potentially on the horizon. So the one I mentioned already, but we do have some stuff coming up.